The Xunzi, Burton Watson Translation. Section 23. Man's nature is evil. Man's nature is evil. Goodness is the result of conscious activity. The nature of man is such that he is born with a fondness for profit. If he indulges this fondness, it will lead him into wrangling and strife, and all sense of courtesy and humility will disappear. He is born with feelings of envy and hate, and if he indulges these, they will lead him into violence and crime, and all sense of loyalty and good faith will disappear. Man is born with the desire for eyes, the desires of the eyes and ears, with a fondness for beautiful sounds and sights. If he indulges these, they will lead him into license and wantonness, and all ritual principles and correct forms will be lost. Hence, any man who follows his nature and indulges his emotions will inevitably become involved in wrangling and strife, will violate the forms and rules of society, and will end as a criminal. Therefore, man must first be transformed by the instructions of a teacher and guided by ritual principles, and only then will he be able to observe the dictates of courtesy and humility, obey the forms and rules of society, and achieve order. It is obvious from this, then, that man's nature is evil, and that his goodness is the result of conscious activity. A warped piece of wood must wait until it has been laid against the straightening board, steamed, and forced into shape before it can become straight. A piece of blunt metal must wait until it has been whetted on a grindstone before it can become sharp. Similarly, since man's nature is evil, it must wait for the instructions of a teacher before it can become upright, and for the guidance of ritual principles before it can become orderly. If men have no teachers to instruct them, they will be inclined towards evil and not upright. And if they have no ritual principles to guide them, they will be perverse and violent and lack order. In ancient times, the sage king realized that man's nature is evil, and that therefore he inclines toward evil and violence is not upright and orderly. Accordingly, they created ritual principles and laid down certain regulations in order to reform man's emotional nature and make it upright, in order to train and transform it and guide it in the proper channels. In this way, they caused all men to become orderly and to conform to the way. Hence, today, any man who takes to heart the instructions of his teacher, applies himself to his studies, and abides by ritual principles, may become a gentleman. But anyone who gives free rein to his emotional nature, is content to indulge his passions, and disregards ritual principles becomes a petty man. It is obvious from this, therefore, that man's nature is evil, and that his goodness is the result of conscious activity. Mencius states that man is capable of learning because his nature is good. But I say that is wrong. It indicates that he has not really understood man's nature, nor distinguished properly between the basic nature and conscious activity. The nature is that which is given by heaven, and you cannot learn it. You cannot acquire it by effort. Ritual principles, on the other hand, are created by sages. You can learn to apply them. You can work to bring them to completion. That part of man which cannot be learned or acquired by effort is called the nature. That part of him which can be acquired by learning and brought to completion by effort is called conscious activity. This is the difference between nature and conscious activity. It is a part of man's nature that his eyes can see and his ears can hear. But the faculty of clear sight can never exist separately from the eye, nor can the faculty of keen hearing exist separately from the ear. It is obvious then that you cannot acquire clear sight and keen hearing by study. Mencius states that man's nature is good, and that all evil arises because he loses his original nature. Such a view, I believe, is erroneous. It is the way with man's nature that as soon as he is born, he begins to depart from his original naivety and simplicity, and therefore he must inevitably lose what Mencius regards as his evil original nature. It is obvious from this, then, that the nature of man is evil. Those who maintain that the nature is good praise and approve whatever has not departed from the original simplicity and naivety of the child. That is, they consider that beauty belongs to the original simplicity and naivety, and goodness to the original mind, in the same way that clear sight is inseparable from the eye, and keen hearing from the ear. Hence they maintain that the nature possesses goodness, in the same way that the eye possesses clear vision or the keen ear keenness of hearing. Now, it is the nature of man that when he is hungry, he will desire satisfaction. When he is cold, he will desire warmth. And when he is weary, he will desire rest. This is his emotional nature. And yet a man, although he is hungry, will not dare to be the first to eat if he is in the presence of his elders, because he knows that he should yield to them, and although he is weary, he will not dare to demand rest because he knows that he should relieve others of the burden of labour. For a son to yield to his father, or younger brother to his elder brother, for a son to relieve his father of work, or younger brother to relieve his elder brother, acts such as these are all contrary to man's nature, and run counter to his emotions. And yet they represent the way of filial piety, and the proper forms enjoined by ritual principles. Hence, if man follows their emotional nature, there will be no courtesy or humility. Courtesy or humility, in fact, run counter to man's emotional nature. From this it is obvious, then, that man's nature is evil, and that his goodness is the result of conscious activity. Someone may ask, if man's nature is evil, then where do ritual principles come from? I would reply, all ritual principles are produced by the conscious activity of the sages. Essentially, they are not products of man's nature. A potter moulds clay and makes a vessel, but the vessel is the product of conscious activity of the potter, not essentially a product of his human nature. A carpenter carves a piece of wood and makes a utensil, but the utensil is the product of the conscious activity of the carpenter, not essentially a product of his human nature. The sage gathers together his thoughts and ideas, experiments with various forms of conscious activity, and so produces ritual principles and sets forth laws and regulations. Hence, these ritual principles and laws are the products of conscious activity of the sage, not essentially products of his human nature. Phenomena such as the eye's fondness for beautiful forms, and the ear's fondness for beautiful sounds, the mouth's fondness for delicious flavours, the mind's fondness for profit, or the body's fondness for pleasure, these are all products of the emotional nature of man. They are instinctive and spontaneous. Man does not have to do anything to produce them, but that which does not come into being instinctively must wait for some activity to bring it into being is called the product of conscious activity. These are the products of nature and of conscious activity respectively, and the proof that they are not the same. Therefore, the sage transforms his nature and initiates conscious activity. From his conscious activity, he produces ritual principles, and when they have been produced, he sets up rules and regulations. Hence, ritual principles and rules are produced by the sage. In respect to human nature, the sage is the same as all other men, and does not surpass them. It is only in his conscious activity that he differs from and surpasses other men. It is man's emotional nature to love profit and to desire gain. Suppose now that a man has some wealth to be divided. If he indulges his emotional nature, loving profit and desiring gain, then he will quarrel and wrangle even with his own brothers over the division. But if he has been transformed by the proper forms of ritual principle, then he will be capable of yielding even to the complete stranger. Hence, to indulge the emotional nature leads to quarrelling of brothers, but to be transformed by ritual principles makes a man capable of yielding to strangers. Every man who desires to do good does so precisely because his nature is evil. A man whose accomplishments are meagre longs for greatness. An ugly man longs for beauty. A man in cramped quarters longs for spaciousness. A poor man longs for wealth, a humble man longs for eminence. Whatever a man lacks in himself he will seek outside. But if a man is already rich, he will not long for wealth, and if he is already eminent, he will not long for great power. What a man already possesses in himself, he will not bother to look for outside. From this we can see that men desire to do good precisely because their nature is evil. Ritual principles are certainly not a part of man's original nature. Therefore he forces himself to study and to seek to possess them. An understanding of ritual principle is not a part of man's original nature, and therefore he ponders and plans and thereby seeks to understand them. Hence, man in the state in which he is born neither possesses nor understands ritual principles. If he does not possess ritual principles, his behavior will be chaotic, and if he does not understand them, he will be wild and irresponsible. In fact, therefore, man in the state in which he is born possesses this tendency towards chaos and irresponsibility. From this, it is obvious then that man's nature is evil, and that goodness is the result of conscious activity.